Clearly, Stanley was being disingenuous. We've seen how enthusiastically he pressed his cause with various parties who were closer to Dickens than he was. Also, the chronology is too compressed to convince us that it was only when Forster saw the leader in the Times on the morning of the 13th of June that he jumped on a train from Higham to Charing Cross and went straight to the Abbey to meet the Dean and accede to what Georgina Hogarth called the larger demand. There's also the question of what part Stanley's brother-in-law, Frederick Locker, and possibly his journalist brother Arthur played in the Times leader. It's significant that Stanley refers to Forster as Dickens's future biographer in his recollections. The Life of Charles Dickens has, of course, become the standard, indispensable source text for any serious student of Dickens's life and work. We've long known that it features omissions and misrepresentations about, for example, Dickens's private life and the essential role played by Ellen Ternan. The death and burial have, however, stood out as an under-researched area, free from serious scrutiny. In an attempt to interrogate and potentially dislodge details that have become stubbornly canonical, we need to employ the methodologies of microhistory, which allow us to reduce the scale of observation and examine minute details in the crucial period from the 9th to the 13th of June 1870, in order to reveal a different, more nuanced, evidence-based narrative from the one promoted by John Forster in his authoritative Life of Charles Dickens, or by Dickens's children in their accounts. Recent developments in critical biography of the kind promoted by historian Nigel Hamilton, who has reassessed such major figures as Field Marshal Montgomery and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, encourage a multidisciplinary approach, which I myself have used in my reevaluation of Dickens's death and burial. By analyzing not only documentary evidence, including the comments of minor players whose voices have not been heard before, but also using visual images, financial accounts, railway timetables, ecclesiastical protocol, and funerary custom, it's possible to yield results previously unimagined by those who have written more traditional literary biographies. Leon Adel, the biographer of Henry James and an influential biography theorist, observed in a Paris Review exchange, in the writing of the life, changes occur, discoveries are made, realities emerge. He added that critical acumen must be exercised over the way the materials are melted down, the supreme art of summary, the delicate use of other persons' mail. He also acknowledges that there is always an air of mystery. Every box of letters you open, every attic in which you rummage, becomes filled with the emotions of the biographer's involvement. But the effective biographer, says Adele, in touch with realities, must abandon his or her love affair with the subject to become a more detached analyst. The circumstances surrounding Dickens's death and burial have largely been taken for granted over the last 150 years without critical reassessment, except the key revelation that Ellen Ternan was at the Abbey. Now, however, by exposing ambivalences, paying heed to previously silenced voices, and abandoning the expectations of a single coherent narrative, a new, more detailed, but nonetheless sensitive and captivating account of this key moment is permitted to emerge. The reality, however, is that Dickens ended up in the Abbey, and this placement has done his reputation no end of good. If it weren't for the COVID crisis, I would today be participating in the wreath-laying ceremony that occurs every year on the 9th of June at Dickens's grave in Westminster. I was there in 2012 at the time of the Dickens bicentenary, standing very close to the Prince of Wales as he laid the wreath. The service wasn't a private religious commemoration, but rather an important marker for the life and culture of the nation. Not only did the heir to the throne participate, but Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, gave the address, and the national anthem was sung. The prayers offered that day opened with these words: "Let us praise God, the source of all creativity and beauty, for the flair and genius of Charles Dickens, for his gifts of observation and imagination, for his writing and characterization, for his humor and ability both to captivate and to move." The service also included selective quotes from the leader in the Times of the 15th of June 1870. The piece opened with these words: It will give the country great pleasure to learn that the proposal we supported on Monday has commended itself to the relations of our great novelist, and that the remains of Charles Dickens were yesterday laid in Westminster Abbey. This self-satisfied comment wasn't reprinted in 2012. Nevertheless, what did appear from the leader in the order of service makes it clear that Poets' Corner was the logical, indeed the only site for the interment of the author's remains. It reads, "He left directions that he should be carried to the grave as an ordinary man, nothing more and nothing less. And his career has received this fitting completion. But his true place among us nonetheless demanded acknowledgement, and we have now recognized it in the only public manner possible. The Abbey may be considered as the family grave of the nation, the mass of men playing their part among a small circle of relatives and friends. They have their little time of influence, and they rest most appropriately among those who knew them best and where they will be the longest remembered. But there are some few who hold kindred with successive generations, whose friends are found in the great of every age, and whose influence lives as long as there are Englishmen, or even men to be influenced. And such as these are most fitly laid in that which is to the nation the sepulchre of our fathers." Arthur Penrhyn Stanley and John Forster had then achieved the aim of giving Dickens the kind of burial befitting a man of his celebrity status, in the place where he would have the greatest exposure. Westminster Abbey claims that Dickens's grave is today one of the most visited by tourists, and so there is a clear commercial and cultural benefit to the gravesite. It occupies a central place in the nation's capital, across the road from Parliament, rather than an obscure, hard-to-reach churchyard, or even in a regional side chapel, where fans can gather, admire, pay respects, and even take a selfie. Dickens was intensely aware of his celebrity status during his lifetime and used all means at his disposal, including photography and media interest, to promote himself and his work. We must remember, though, that celebrity is a manufactured commodity that depends for its effect on the degree to which the fan, which comes from the word fanatic, can be manipulated into believing a particular story about the person whom he or she adores. Dickens wrote to Forster about his reception at a reading before 2,500 people in Manchester in 1858. "The welcome they gave me was astounding. I never saw such a sight or heard such a sound." Of course, Dickens himself made much of this possible, but when he died, it was left to others to ensure that the show went on and that the public adulation continued undiminished. The process was aided and abetted by Stanley and Forster, whose motivations were not altruistic. Their own reputations grew by each having his own piece of Dickens, whether in officiating at a funeral in Poets' Corner or in completing a carefully crafted biography with his grand triumphant finale. It took a deal of plotting to achieve these rewards and capitalize on the demise of this most famous Victorian celebrity.